The shadow on the mountain peak, the mystery of the ownerless silhouette, high in the northern wilderness of Colorado. Beyond the well-marked trails and far from the camps where most hikers dared to venture, stood a barren ridge known as Raven's Peak. Locals didn't talk about it much. Those who did always lowered their voices, as if the mountain might be listening. There were rumors. Of course, strange ones. Stories of a shadow that appeared just before sundown, standing on the highest ridge even when no person was there. Most people brushed it off as folklore, a trick of the light. But not Evan Carter. Evan was a nature journalist with a growing YouTube channel where he documented odd events in remote places. After a viral video about eerie whistles in Utah's sandstone canyons, his audience began sending him local legends to investigate. One viewer sent only a single line: "Go to Raven's Peak. Watch the ridge at dusk. Look for the shadow that doesn't belong." At first, Evan assumed it was a hoax, someone trying to get content out of him. But something about the message, the way it was written with no explanation, stuck with him. And so, 2 weeks later, camera gear packed and boots laced, he headed into the mountains. Raven's Peak wasn't beautiful the way most mountains were. It felt hollow. As Evan approached, a strange wind cut across the trail, whistling like a warning. Even the birds avoided the area. The whole place seemed drained of color, as though the mountain absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. He set up camp at the base and waited. As the sun began sinking behind the Rockies, the ridge grew darker. A thin fog crawled down the slope, not drifting like normal fog, but pulling itself forward, almost with purpose. Evan focused his camera on the highest point, and then he saw it. A shadow, tall and thin, stretched across the ridge. He could make out a head, shoulders, long arms hanging at its sides. The sun was behind him, so the shadow should have pointed east, but this one pointed toward him, toward the valley, toward Evan. He looked through his viewfinder, zooming in. The shadow was perfectly still. Even though the wind howled fiercely across the peak, it wasn't attached to anything. No trees, no rocks, no person, nothing. Just a shadow standing upright, alone on the ridge. Evan blinked. The shadow flickered. For a moment he thought he saw it turn, slightly, as if its head had shifted to look directly at him. A chill crept up his arms. He lowered the camera. When he looked again, the shadow was gone, vanished. The ridge was empty. He replayed the footage. The shadow was there on the screen, dark and sharp, but even stranger. His camera picked up a faint hum, a vibrating sound that he hadn't heard with his own ears, like whispering, just below the threshold of hearing. That night, he slept poorly. The wind never stopped, and occasionally he thought he heard footsteps crunching outside his tent. Once he sat up, convinced someone was standing near him, but when he checked, the trail was empty. The next morning, Evan climbed toward the ridge. He followed his GPS and the faint animal paths that led upward, but nothing looked right. The landscape felt distorted, as if pieces of the trail had shifted overnight. Trees leaned in unnatural angles, like they were bending away from something. Rocks seemed arranged deliberately, forming odd shapes he didn't recognize. A triangle here, a spiral there. The closer he got to the ridge, the more frequent these strange formations became. At one point, he touched a rock embedded in the ground. It was unnaturally warm, almost hot, as if it had been sitting in the sun all day. Even though the entire area was still shaded by morning clouds, by noon he reached a narrow shelf near the top. The wind was fiercer here, but not loud. It was strangely muffled, like someone was pressing heavy curtains over the world. Then he saw something new. Footprints, not boot prints, not animal prints, just shadows of footprints, as though someone had stepped on the sunlight, leaving behind dark impressions that didn't align with any physical indent in the ground. Evan crouched next to one. When he passed his hand over it, A cold pain shot into his palm. It wasn't the kind of cold from snow or winter. This felt deep, like his bones had turned to ice. He pulled back quickly, heart racing. Then he heard it. A whisper, soft, thread-like. "Don't look at it." Evan sounded around, but no one was there. The wind stopped completely. The entire mountain fell silent. He took several shaky breaths and forced himself to continue climbing. The ridge was narrower than it looked from below. One wrong step, and he could easily fall hundreds of feet. But what frightened him more was the sense that he wasn't alone. His skin prickled, and every few seconds he felt watched, like eyes were tracking his movements, waiting. When he reached the highest point, he set his camera on a tripod and turned in a full circle. Nothing unusual, no shadow, no figure, just barren stone and endless empty sky. He felt foolish. Had he been scared by some weird optical illusion? Maybe the fog and low light made the shadow appear distorted. Yet, the camera footage didn't lie, and neither did the shadow footprints. He stayed until dusk, and that's when everything changed. As the sky darkened, the ground beneath Evan began to dim, not from the sunset, but from something else. A shape formed at his feet, a silhouette. He froze. It was his shadow, but wrong, twisted, too tall, arms too long, the head slightly tilted in an unnatural way. Then a second shadow appeared beside it, the figure from the first night. But this time, it wasn't on the ridge, it was right next to him. Evan's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. The shadow figure stood completely still, yet it seemed to breathe. Each rise and fall of its outline made the ground vibrate faintly, like the tremor of a distant earthquake. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The shadows stretched, lengthened, and began merging his and the figure's, blending into one distorted shape. Evan backed away. "Stop, stop," he muttered. Though he wasn't sure who he was talking to, the shadow figure suddenly moved. It turned, not like a human turns. Its body bent at impossible angles, as if joints were positioned in the wrong places. Then it lifted an arm, not toward Evan, but toward the sky. The clouds split open with a sound like tearing metal. A beam of cold, pale light shone directly onto the ridge, bathing the shadow in a ghostly glow. And then Evan heard it again, whispering, but this time it was louder, clearer. Voices overlapping, layered like echoes from different time periods. "Leave, leave, leave. Go back. Turn away." Evan grabbed his camera and stumbled backwards, nearly tripping off the ridge. The shadow twisted violently as if struggling against something. Its form flickered, distorted like a glitching video. Then it lunged, not at Evan, but toward his shadow. Its dark form collided with his, merging with it, stretching it across the ground in long, unnatural streaks. Evan screamed and ran. He didn't look back, not once. Branches tore at his jacket, rocks slid beneath his feet, all the while. The ground shook with each step the shadow took behind him, though he could never see it directly. At one point he glanced down. His shadow was moving out of sync with his body. If he lifted his arm, the shadow delayed. If he turned his head, the shadow twitched like it was being controlled by someone else. He ran faster. By the time he reached the base, his lungs were burning and his legs felt like they might give out. He jumped into his car, turned the engine, and sped away without looking back even once at Raven's Peak. Evan didn't post the footage. He tried to review it, but every file was corrupted. Not by normal digital corruption, the images stretched and twisted in the same unnatural ways the shadow had moved. The audio was filled with whispers, overlapping and layered, too distorted to understand, except for one sentence. Perfectly clear, shadows belong to those who survive the mountain for weeks afterward. Evan noticed his shadow behaving strangely in the corners of rooms, stretching long when there was no light source. Sometimes he woke up at night and saw it standing against the wall, separate from his body, watching him, waiting. He's not sure what it wants, only that it followed him, and that some shadows aren't yours to begin with.